Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for attending the first ever $1 Million Arm Symposium. It's presented by the Minnesota Twins in conjunction with the Legion Baseball Hub. We'd like to thank many of our sponsors and partners that have been a part of this, including the Mayo Clinic Sports Medicine, Under Armour, and of course the Legion Baseball Hub. Today we're going to cover a bevy of topics with each and every one of you as it pertains to pitching, arm health, and the future of pitchers, and even position players and how it impacts their future in the game, not only in a term of baseball health, but also in the terms of overall health as well. So without further ado, my name is Pete Wagner. I'll be your MC, and we'll introduce you to our panel of experts, and we are really fortunate to have assembled this group of people to make things happen here today and have a great discussion and really further what we're doing. First on the end of the table here, I'd like to introduce you to Jim Brower via Minnetonka, Minnesota. He was a member of 8 Major League Baseball teams, of which started on the top end with the Cleveland Indians in his first year and ended with the New York Yankees in his last. Phil Mackey over here, who I'll introduce you in a minute, will have a great story back and forth with him about something he accomplished as well. He's also now the pitching coordinator for the Chicago Cubs. Jim Brower. The man seated to Jim's left is Dan Christopher, and he is the lead baseball softball performance program director. Can I use that term? Okay, we will. At the Mayo Clinic Sports Medicine. He is also a 3-year athletic trainer in the Dodgers organization, and Dan has some incredible insights on what you need to do to maintain and continue the health of your arm and your arm care. Dan Christopher will have some great information for us. To Dan's left is Dr. Diane Dom. She's the orthopedic surgeon at the Mayo Clinic, also with the Minnesota Twins and the Minnesota Timberwolves. And since the Golden Gopher football team's playing right now, I've been told in the circles of orthopedic surgery, she is elite, no question. And she is one of the best around, and the Twins and the Wolves and us as a group are very fortunate to have Dr. Dom with us today. The man to her left needs no introduction. He is a coach with the University of Minnesota Golden Gophers baseball program, of which he's been a part of a coaching staff that has attained 17 NCAA tournament appearances. You don't recognize him because he doesn't have the bucket hat if you see him out scouting ball players out there in the high school ages. Rob Fornasiere from the University of Minnesota is going to give us some great insights on what he sees out there as far as everything from scouting to the collegiate level as a coach and things that can help you moving forward. Rob Fornasiere. Finally, Phil Mackey to my left. He's the host of the Mackey and Judd Show. He has the Touch 'Em All podcast on 1500ESPN.com. He also served as a Twins beat writer, is a longtime baseball analytic enthusiast, and also I would like to introduce you to my friend and your host, Phil Mackey.
Thank you, Pete. Appreciate it. And thank you guys for coming out. I think there are probably a lot more questions about arm injuries and arm care than answers, and we're hoping to at least get some of the answers and get some thoughts from some experts here on stage. But I was just digging around through Jeff Passan's book, The Arm, and some other resources. Anybody want to guess how many pitchers in the major leagues, or what percentage of pitchers land on the disabled list any given year? Anyone just want to shout out an answer? Any guess? What percentage of pitchers wind up on the disabled list? 40? Higher. 50% of major league pitchers wind up on the disabled list on average any given year. Now, those aren't all arm injuries, but something like 25% wind up needing Tommy John surgery at some point in their careers. And so my first question to the panel, let's start with Rob, and you guys can share microphones as we go through here. Let's start with Rob. I just want to know, throughout your career in baseball, what's the most impactful arm injury that you've ever experienced or seen or been around? The most noteworthy or impactful arm injury that you've been around?
Well, first of all, thanks for the opportunity, and for those of you out in the audience, thanks for taking the time on this Saturday afternoon to come and visit and learn and share with each other. Well, as a college coach, you always are worried about injuries to any player. And I would say that it's devastating to see any college player that has high aspirations, was a dominant high school player, to come into a college program and have a severe arm injury. I was telling Dr. Dom that we have a current freshman on our team right now, a sophomore, that just had Tommy John surgery. And they become disconnected with the team. And, you know, he started several games last year. I think it's very devastating to his psyche. There's no doubt about it. On the major league level, I knew John Smoltz when he was a high school player, and he's the first Hall of Fame baseball player that ever had Tommy John surgery to be inducted in the Hall of Fame. And I listened to his Hall of Fame speech, and it was very profound. If you ever get a chance to go to YouTube, look up and listen to John Smoltz' Hall of Fame speech, because it's all about direction and messages to parents and coaches about just overuse. And obviously he had a great career, but he had several surgeries, so very dramatic on his part.
Dr. Dom, you've been around baseball, you've been around a lot of sports, but the most impactful arm injury or devastating to a player's career that you've seen?
Yeah, so one of the great things about being a physician is you get to work with all these athletes and watch them recover from injury, and most of the time they are able to recover from injury, but there are certainly occasions when that's very difficult. And I remember a specific injury that was very devastating. It was a pitcher that came in with a swollen arm, and it's actually a surgical emergency. It was a thrombosis of their subclavian vein. And, you know, it's one of those things that you don't see very often, but when you see it, you know this person needs to go to the emergency room right away. And they can actually, you know, lose their arm if you don't treat it right away. And so, you know, that was probably one of the most impactful things that I saw. We got him to the emergency room, got him in, anticoagulated him, and he was able to return. But that's probably one of the most impactful types of arm injuries that I've seen.
Dan Christopher. It should be on. You're
Yeah,
good.
all right, here we go. So first of all, thanks all for coming. I appreciate you coming out. I would say probably the most, the saddest one is the ones that we see pre-high school. You know, anytime you're having surgery pre-high school, you know, it's nothing fun to see with that. But I think probably the most impactful one I saw was when I was with the Dodgers. We had a pretty high-level prospect who, for lack of better words, didn't like to listen very well, so didn't like to go through a lot of the stretching and stuff that we recommended. So his idea of stretching out was hanging on a pull-up bar and bouncing up and down. So needless to say, he pulled avulsion fracture of his latissimus dorsi muscle, and he never pitched again. So he was done, and that's one thing that, you know, hopefully we'll get into later on is making sure that we're kind of doing some of the right things with stretching, warm up, cool down, so forth. So,
Jim Brower, most impactful injury that you've been around, arm injury, or that you've seen?
The most impactful, I didn't actually see it. His name was Chris Rietzma. He was a teammate of mine when I was with Cincinnati Reds, and in high school he broke his elbow. How he did it, I have no idea, but he broke it. And he was just telling me the story, and this is in the big leagues, that, you know, he just wasn't in very good shape, he had a good arm, and it broke. And so he went through the story, and I just got chills just thinking about it. But looking at what he has to do now, he goes, Jim, you see what I'm doing? And this is before having a panel like this. This was back in the early 2000s, where the only time you did kind of shoulder work is if you were hurt. So this preventative stuff wasn't really a part of the game. And so by listening to his story, it was hugely impactful, because at that point, I was 24 years old. I started doing shoulder work, even though my arm has always been, I was blessed with health. And then from that point on, velocity increased. My arm sometimes had some tendonitis, it went away. And I learned from Chris Rietzma, because I didn't want to have to go through that myself. So as an injury, that was hugely impactful for me, because he went through it. I got to see him get through it himself, and then I knew it was something I didn't want to be a part of. So that injury to me was kind of that stepping point of, I've always been able to do it without it, but I do not want that to happen. So then I just started taking care of myself.
So let's start with Jim here because you used the word preventative, and that's a good segue into, let's just dive right into this question, starting with Jim, and let's go on down the panel. How preventative are elbow and or shoulder injuries in your mind?
I would like to say 100%, but I don't think I can say that. But, because when you're throwing something, there's always a risk of injury. I mean, it's not a normal act. But I do think through, when I say preventative, listening to your arm, strengthening like off-season, in-season, making sure you maintain it. There's so much that's involved nowadays because of expectations and, the need to feel like you have to get after it every day. The only way to do that is you have to train to it. And so that doesn't mean training at 100% every day, but it does mean that you have to put the time and effort in to what, we're about to say, whether it's shoulder work, finding a routine, things that are, individual. There's a framework you can work around, but that individuality can absolutely help, stave off shoulder, elbow, and I don't think it's 100%, but I know it's something that's needed.
Dan, same question. How preventable do you think shoulder and elbow injuries are?
Well, first of all, a lot of the shoulder and elbow injuries are created or are overuse injuries. So the definition of overuse injuries can be prevented. Like Jim said, there's no way of preventing 100% of the injuries. But if we can kind of continue to improve those numbers, that's what we want to see. Right now, we're seeing the numbers go the opposite way, which is obviously why we're here today. So in a UCL, for instance, the Tommy John ligament, you're going to have a pristine ligament there when you first start playing ball. But, you, as age and stuff, you're going to have micro traumas to that. You don't have one specific throw right away that's going to cause that Tommy John injury. It's the micro traumas over the years that causes that type of injury.
Dr. Dom?
So one thing that we're seeing in Major League Baseball is actually the DL stints for shoulder injuries are going down. And I think that really speaks to what we've just been talking about, that there are preventative things, particularly for the shoulder, that we can do. For example, the stretching properly, working your core, making sure that you're not, working out in pain. I mean, there's lots of things that we can do for the shoulder. The elbow's a little bit harder. I think that's more of a true overuse type injury. And we see it, the harder kids throw, especially those kids that are throwing over 85 miles per hour, the more often they're throwing, it's simply an overuse situation. And that ligament can't handle that kind of throwing over and over and over without the proper rest.
Yeah, Rob Fornasiere, your thoughts?
Well, I think that, first of all, in this latitude of the country, there's never been more opportunities to train on a year-round basis for pitching and throwing. And a generation ago, most of those opportunities didn't exist. Kids would play other sports. They take a rest period. Most of the research says that you need to stay away from throwing for at least 2 months a year, if not 3. I just happened to listen to a podcast of Dr. Jamie Andrews yesterday from Alabama. He mentioned specifically, if you had one thing you could tell parents and coaches to help prevent injuries, what would it be? He said, take more time off in the off season of not throwing. It's hard to do. It's hard to do because there's so many opportunities out there. Oftentimes you think you're falling behind. You're not keeping up with the next player. But if you're going to advance in your career, you got to be healthy. And so certainly at a young age, taking 2 to 3 months off and not even picking up a ball in the off season, you can train, you can lift, you can do aerobic conditioning, so on and so forth, core strengthening, but just not pitching off the mound and not throwing will bring your back a fresh arm for the next season.
So how do you balance, and we'll start with Rob and come back down the line here, because if you look at Major League Baseball, for instance, and fans have more access to information than ever before, too, and you'll see that velocity keeps going up year after year. And you look at any bullpen that posts the best ERA and the best strikeout rates, and you got guys throwing 97, 100 miles an hour. How do you balance trying to improve a pitch repertoire or increase velocity with also trying to play the long game and make sure that you're healthy and make sure that you're not doing irreparable damage to your elbow or your shoulder?
Well, I'll certainly leave the medical terminology to our esteemed guest to my right, but I would say that just to give you a couple of statistics that I compiled that I think are important. There's 296 Division I baseball programs in the United States, and each of them can have no more than 35 players on a team. That's approximately 10,000 Division I players. Last year, there was about 500,000 high school players in the United States. So only 10,000 out of 500,000 are even going to get to Division I baseball. To place that even greater perspective, if you're a high school player, 1% of the high school players get drafted into professional baseball. 1%. So putting that in perspective, you might say, I'm chasing the dream. I want to be a major league player, and there's certainly nothing wrong with chasing the dream. But when you look down the panel at Jim Brower, I mean, Jim Brower beat incredible odds to be a major league player even for one day, let alone last as long as he had. So I think by placing things in perspective on where your son is at in his career is important. And you asked, how do you balance that? You balance that by enjoying the game, developing in the game, but to a certain extent, your fate is going to be determined not just by your training, but also by your genetics and certainly maybe your opportunities long term.
Yeah, Dr. Dom, I guess I would phrase the question this way too. You know, for anyone looking to add velocity, anyone looking to get a little extra vertical break on their breaking pitches, but also trying to balance not fraying your labrum or tearing your UCL, how would you sort of describe that gray area?
Yeah, it's a great question because once you've gotten to the major leagues, we're really dealing with things that have happened as a kid all the way up, you know, and so that's the time we really want to pay attention when you're a young kid, when you're 12, 13, 14 years old. If you pitch more than 100 innings per year, you're 2 to 3 times more likely to have an injury ultimately.
And that's in a calendar year, right? Mm-hmm. For a 12, 13, 14-year-old. So not, hey, 100 innings in the spring and 100 innings in, yeah.
Exactly. And, you know, I think that it's very important not to throw in pain. You know, if you see your kid out there and they're telling you when they come out their arm hurts, that's something to pay attention to. If they have shoulder or elbow pain and they're, you know, 13, 14 years old, really listen to them, you know, get them in to see at least their trainer and start there. But I think it's extremely important that you start when they're young.
What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, obviously we're going to echo a lot of our colleagues here, but fatigue as well, you know, making sure we're paying attention to the fatigue mark too. I think in the off season you have that roughly probably 3 months that you have to take off. It doesn't mean that you have to completely not work on mechanics and so forth. You know, there's some things that if you got a good pitching coach, work with them with different towel drills, get in front of the mirror, working on different things, do some video analysis of your stuff so you can kind of pick that apart, break down your mechanics so you can kind of work on some things. I do a lot of stuff in the clinic where we're just doing a lot of mirror work, trying to get these guys to repetition to try to change one little thing. And just during those 3 months, that's a good opportunity to work on some of those type of aspects.
So just for some context here before Jim answers, part of Jim's job as the pitching coordinator for a major league team and then previously a pitching coach in the Royals organization is to make sure that you're developing pitchers, that pitchers are maybe getting an uptick in their velocity, that they're sharpening their breaking pitches. So how do you go about instructing, especially the younger players who are more moldable throughout the minor league system? What's your process and what do you tell these young players?
It's, as you get into professional baseball, with what I'm doing is that they're professionals, and we have a lot of things for them, whether it's a dietitian, so their nutrition's taken care of. We do sleep studies. We have almost personal trainers for all these young men. And when I say that, they're 18 to 26, let's say. And all of it is kind of a gradual build. And even Theo Epstein, when we talk, we don't bring up velocity. We'll take it if they have it, but we don't put that as the number one thing that we do. And so that's part of, and what Dr. Don was talking about, there's a lot involved. Is it core? Is it mechanics? Yes, it's all of it. And professionally, it is hard to keep up with all of it, let alone having an amateur player chasing, you know, velocity, and they're not doing all those other things that professional players are doing. you guys may not know the work that is involved for a major league pitcher. I mean, it is not just wake up and I'm thrown off a mound. There's a ton of preparation, strength, conditioning, the training staff. And that's why you're seeing these velocities, 93, 94, 95. Absolutely. And injuries still happen with the greatest care in the world. Now, on the amateur side, my advice is you don't chase a number. People want to chase 90. 90 is a major league average fastball. No, it's not. I mean, it's 89, 90 is, when they grade it out, they say, well, it's an average major league fastball. That was back when I was early 90s. Now, the average major league right-handed starter is like 93, 93 and a half. Relievers, 95. So chasing 90 actually is not going to help you. Like Rob was kind of alluding to, is that it is hard. It's hard to make the major leagues. I love goals. I love dreams. Never lose that, but there's other ways you can separate. And don't chase velocity. Don't chase a number. There's mechanics. There's refinement. There's consistency and other things you can do. And then as you go through it, if you get stronger and velocity happens to show up, nobody's going to say no to it. But then you've already dealt with the other, routines and, the pitchability. You have all that checked off the box. And then velocity, if it's the last thing that you add, which is kind of one of the things that happened to me, then you become a major league pitcher. Yeah. But you can't jump it.
Rob, what are your thoughts from when you watch high school players and then up the ladder to Division I college, your philosophies and thoughts on velocity?
Well, we're all infatuated with the radar gun. There's no doubt about that. The radar gun has changed baseball. In fact, before this started, I was asking Dr. Dahm about, if she remembered Warren Spahn, the winningest left-hander in Major League history. She's much younger than I am, so she doesn't remember. But anyway, I don't think he ever threw a pitch over 85 miles an hour in his entire career, and he won over 300 games. There was a four-man rotation. They threw 300 innings in a season, and obviously that's entirely changed because the emphasis then was not on the radar gun. It was about getting outs in pitching. And the thing that I look for in high school pitchers is projectability, how much better are they going to get, their body leverage, their athleticism, and then just the ability to throw strikes, throw the ball over the plate, I think is a great start. And the best pitchers that we've had at Minnesota have been the kids that have shown an ability at a young age to throw the ball over the plate with consistent mechanics, put some stuff on it, develop their off-speed pitches. Then as their body develops, they certainly add more velocity. It's interesting that Jim Brower's included in this case. Most of the pitchers that have left our program that have reached the major leagues have not done so until they're 24 to 28 years of age. And you could go right down the line with Kerry Leitenberg, and the exception would be Glenn Perkins because he's left-handed and he was a first-round draft pick. But there's been many others, Seth Rosine, been many others that have reached the major leagues, but not till later in their career. The northern player develops at a slower rate than other parts of the country, and like Jim and others, rarely have they been hurt at a young age, at least up to this point, that they haven't had all of these volumes of repetitions as a youngster that maybe other parts of the country have. I hesitate to recruit in the South or California because they've been pitching so long already that really how much better are they going to get and how soon is it going to be before they break down?
So, and we'll start with Dr. Dahm on this because I think a lot of points have been made about that age 12 to 18 group, and maybe you can even divide that group into a couple different groups as well. But what are some things, I've heard overuse, I've heard chasing velocity. What are some things that you absolutely look at as a red flag, age 12 to 18, when it comes to elbow and shoulder injuries in particular?
Specializing too soon, that's your only sport. You don't play basketball. You don't play anything other than baseball. And I think that's really one of the things I look for. I try to tell these kids, play a different sport in the winter. Find something else to do. Take time off from throwing. And it's really hard because the kids that are throwing the hardest, these 85 mile an hour and above, they're the ones everyone wants to see, and they're thinking about that goal of getting to the majors. And I also wanted to bring up UCL surgery. So how many people think that UCL or Tommy John surgery makes you throw harder and throw faster?
She does up there, yes.
Okay. So the research would show that you really don't throw faster than a group of controls or control pitchers that have not had the surgery. So that's kind of a bit of a myth. You may throw faster than you did right before you were hurt, or
Right, because your velocity may have dipped
Exactly.
4 miles an hour, and now you're.
and you
back to
also
where
have
were.
18 or 16 months, to work on everything, your core, your mechanics, and that sort of thing.
What about that 12 to 18 age group, Dan? The red flags you see when you hear, whether it's innings limits, or I've heard debates over whether you should be throwing breaking pitches certain ages. What are some of the big red flags that you see in that 12 to 18 age group?
All right. So when I played, and these guys as well, you're a three-sport athlete. I came from Iowa. You're a four-sport athlete. Number one thing is a sport specialization. So I agree with Dr. Dom that we are specializing way too much into one sport, but that's this day and age. So how can we help with that? Obviously, the rest is probably the other thing. The pitcher going to catcher. So you have a good youth team, and your best player is your best pitcher. Where are you going to put them next? You put them either at catcher, or you're going to put them at shortstop, likely, right? Or they're going to get just as much throwing there as well. So, if you want to save that kid a little bit more, let's move them to first base. Let's move them to the outfield. So they're not getting quite as much reps with that. Them playing on multiple teams. Yeah, there's so much more opportunities than when I was playing that these kids have ample opportunities to play with different teams, different Legion teams, different all-star teams, whatever it may be. So they're able to do that. So they're just pushing more and more. Kind of playing through that fatigue pain. We talked about that. The biomechanics is another one. The biggest thing I see, especially in that high school range, and when I go out and work with a lot of these teams and these players, none of them have a proper warm-up. None of them have a cool-down. So when they come out with a warm-up, they just go up and grab a ball and start playing catch. They don't do anything as far as warming up with the arm, getting that nice and loose. So when I do that, one of the big ones I do is what we call hand jives. So when I tell them just like in the movie Grease, they look at me like, I've never heard the movie Grease. Go ask your parents, right? So doing the hand jives, doing the arm circles, doing the arm pumps. So doing some of those type of things to get that rotator cuff, get the arm kind of nice and loose before you even pick up a ball. We do a good job with the lower body, doing the high knees, the karaoke, the sprinting, the stuff like that, but we don't with the arm. The other thing then is the cool down. That guy gets done with the game. We won. We're all happy. We're getting in the minivan, going to Dairy Queen to get our blizzards. We don't do anything as far as a cool down with those players. There's simply there's exercises called Codmans where you just kind of let the arm hang. So anything like a little bit of an arm flush to get some of that lactic acid, get some of that out of there. Hopefully, that'll help kind of with the health of the arm. So making sure you have, and once you get to the collegiate level and get to the professional level, you have people that make you do these things. You're on a routine. So at the youth and the high school level, developing a better routine, I think, is probably one of the better things that I see when I go out there.
Yeah, and isn't that, Jim, when you look at from a major league standpoint too, I would think having more information about what a pitcher's 6 or 7 years before college were like, right? I mean, people always talk about Kerry Wood and how he was one of the great pitchers for 2 or 3 years in the late 90s, and his elbow blows out. He winds up pitching for a while, but the question was, how many curveballs was he throwing when he... And so it's really, like you were saying, Dan, major league teams are tracking this information and forcing pitchers to go through programs. College baseball teams are bag of ice, But from 12 to 18, it's on the parents, it's on the coaches, and it's kind of a wild, wild west, Jim.
It is. 13 to 18, even though I work with professional players for the last 6-7 years, I also do a throwing program in the off season that is 13 to 18-year-olds. So I've worked with over 1,000 young men, and the number one thing that I see, and it, again, I'm not to reiterate what they said because they're right, mechanically, the first thing I look for is the head. When you see professionally, we do the same thing on the amateur side. If you see that head start to bail out, you always hear, keep your head on the target. There's a reason for that. Keep your head on the target Now you're using your whole body. As soon as that head starts to pull off, that's when you're fighting for velocity. That's when you get out of your mechanics, and you'll see it. They call it like a secondary spine angle. They lift, and as soon as that lean back starts, that's what will help expose the shoulder, elbow. So on a just staying healthy side, even though, yes, there's major leaguers that do it, but you don't train to that. You train for health and quality mechanics, and that literally is one of the main things that I look for in an individual when they start to throw is how far do you lean back? And that's like Pryor. Did he do that earlier on? He absolutely did, because he was leveraging himself for velocity. And yes, it got him drafted, and he had really cute mechanics. But even the best mechanics will get hurt if you fall out of them. And that's what happens when he was fighting for more to get drafted, and you don't know the wear and tear. So that's where he got stuck, and that's what we kind of look for me in the offseason for the younger kids. And professionally, that's the first thing that all of my coaches look for.
Yeah. I'd love to know all your thoughts, starting with Rob on the end again here, on pitch counts. I know we've heard the innings number of especially if you're in that 12 to or that 15 to 18 group, 100 innings in a year. You probably don't want to be pushing it too much beyond that. What about pitch counts in individual outings? Your thoughts on pitch counts?
I'm a big proponent of that. Big proponent, especially for young kids. Seen some horrific things out there in scouting circles, watching kids getting overused. I had a good privilege just a couple weeks ago of working with the Team USA 18U team. And up in Canada at the World Championships, they faced Korea. And the Korean pitcher, I wrote it down here, threw 5 2/3 innings against the USA and threw 136 pitches in 5 2/3 innings. Chances are you'll never hear of that Korean pitcher again in his career. Just to give everyone an example, I mean, I work with 18 to 23-year-olds. They're young men. They train on a year-round basis to be pitchers. We open our season in February. In the very first outing, our starting pitchers will not throw more than 60 pitches, and we'll take them out. It doesn't matter what the score is, doesn't matter what the situation is. We take them out of the game, go to the next guy. We have 15 pitchers on our team. When I was coaching in youth athletics, when my son was coming through, 12 kids on the roster. They play 7 games on a weekend, and I'd see other teams start the same kid 3 or 4 times on a weekend, you know. And on my team, I mean, I made everybody a pitcher. Everybody on the team was a pitcher until the kid came back and told me, hey, you know, that's okay, you don't have to pitch me anymore, you know, because the results weren't too good. But you have to get away, especially at the youth athletics level, of the emphasis just on winning. You know, winning ends up making us make decisions that we don't necessarily want to make. And that means overuse. You get a dominant arm and use them over and over and over again. So to me, pitch counts have been a very positive step for the high school, Legion levels to try to control the overzealous coach or the overzealous situation where you got a great pitcher and you just use him to death.
Well, how responsible as a college coach, and then this is even probably a similar question for high school coaches, how responsible do you feel for the future of that pitcher beyond when he's useful to the Gophers, for instance?
Well, there's no question. I mean, this will take some people back, but we had the good fortune of having Denny Nagel on our pitching staff in the late 80s. And I remember that he pitched in the Big Ten tournament on a Sunday, and we got to the NCAA tournament. The first game was the following Thursday. And Coach Anderson did not pitch him. He held him out, and we ended up getting eliminated from the tournament. He never pitched. And he was our best pitcher. And obviously, Denny Nagel went on to a long major league career, and we feel like one of the reasons we didn't kill him when he was in college. And so we were willing to sacrifice short-term gain for long-term winning in terms of his career. And, you know, another example is Dan Wilson, the 14-year major league catcher. And when he came to Minnesota, he was a pitcher and a catcher. And after his first year, we decided that, you know, we're just not going to do this. We hurt our team by only putting him behind the plate. But obviously, the long-term paid off because he had a tremendous career with the Mariners.
Dr. Dom, for you as well, it would seem that there's a temptation if you're running a high school team or a college team that, well, everything cycles through every 3 or 4 years anyways, and so I need to win games. There's pressure on me. Do you see that a lot when you see young pitchers or young players with arm injuries? Is that tug of war something that actually exists?
Absolutely. And I can think of a specific individual who's a 13-year-old kid, really good pitcher, and he came in with a rotator cuff tear. You never, ever see that in young kids, you know. And I thought, how in the world did this happen? He swore, his dad swore, we're going by the pitch counts, you know, he's not pitching more than he's supposed to in the games. But what we found out was that he was going home afterwards and working on pitching with his dad for like an hour after the game. So although he was adhering to the pitch counts in the games, he was doing more later, working on that. And that finally came out.
What would you say is a fair number? And a question for you and then also for Dan here. We'll start with Dr. Dom. What is a fair number for, let's say, a high school pitcher? How many pitches? And some of it might have to do with high stress, low stress pitches, but what's a good range for a pitch count before you really start to potentially see some lasting damage?
Well, I'll let Dan, answer this one, except that I'll say that lasting damage doesn't typically occur with one pitch or one season, but it's the multiple seasons where you're pitching over your pitch count, so over 100 pitches per game, say, for a high school student.
So Dr. Andrews' research actually says 80 pitches.
For high school?
For a high school pitcher, yep.
Okay.
But that's probably a little conservative. I would say probably, right around the... I was part of the pitch count initiation and putting in with the Minnesota State High School League, so I'm going to plead the fifth and say 105 what we put in.
And Jim's going to say, I threw 89 games in one season and threw more pitches than any reliever. So what are your thoughts?
For those that in minor league baseball, we have 7 teams. Of those 7 teams, 142-game schedule plus playoffs, we had over 1,000 games that I'm in charge of. We had 9 pitchers hit 100 pitches in a game. 1,000 games, we had 9 guys go over 100 pitches. And that was like 103, 105. We have a 110-pitch max professionally for us. So that gives you a little feel for how often do we want to push. And when we talk about putting money in investment, the Cubs invested over $9 million in just pitching this year in the draft. That doesn't count the other guys that I have. So, yes, we take care of arms. Do we go on the side of caution? Yes, we do. And for those, does anybody know the Fall League, the Arizona Fall League? Has anybody heard of it? Yes. That's where major league teams like the Cubs will send our 4 best pitchers, or at least the high A, double A type of talent. It's run by Major League Baseball, and they're the ones that are in charge of the rules. They have and this is at the end of a full season, these guys are ready to roll. They have 5 innings or 75 pitches, whichever comes first. And so I'm very conservative, and I love everyone else having a chance to step on the mound, even if it's a shortstop that doesn't like it. But for me, 5 innings, 75 pitches, that's what I've instituted for our lower levels. One, it gives other people an opportunity to pitch, but also safeguards to the best that we can, because, again, we can't stop injury. But I think we can be at least professionally better about conserving some arms.
What about days between outings? Let's go all the way down the line here and start with Jim. Do you think the standard 4 days rest for Major League, I don't know what it is, I guess, for high school and college, but you guys can answer this how you want. Is that accurate? 4 days between? Is it always going to be that way? Do you think it should be, if you had the keys to revamping, what we know about pitching rotations, is that how you would draw it up?
We did a 6-man rotation in the minor leagues for the A-ball levels. For those that don't know, we have a AAA team, AA team, 2 A-ball teams, and then lower levels. We had a 6-man rotation. That means that a guy would start, get 2 days off, he'd throw a bullpen, 2 days off, and then start. The organization went to a 5-man rotation, which then we put a lot of emphasis on recovery. I think that's I think we did a really good job this year organizationally on, we got away from kind of status quo, because if you watch the Twins, the standard is they start, they have the next day off, they throw their side, like a bullpen day, they get a day off, and they start. That's a 5-man standard rotation. What we did is we gave them an extra day of rest. So they started, they got their day off. The next day was not on the mound. That was our recovery day. Then they throw their side, they feel a little bit better, day off, and then start with limited pitches and innings. And what we were able to do, and we saw, these guys, after their questionnaires, they felt better after a long season. They felt a little bit better rested. And I think that extra day of recovery, because if people work out, that second day soreness, at least for me, it is a real thing. Because I'd pitch, next day I'm like, I don't feel so bad. Next day, I feel like crap. But then that's the day we put more stress on kids because that's when the bullpen starts. So that's why organizationally we're putting rest and recovery as a foundation, and then we build off that.
What about the high school level, Dan? What's an ideal, when you're not pitching, how many days between? What's an ideal schedule for what you should aim for if you're a parent or a pitcher or a coach?
Well, that's always tough. In high school pitching, you're lucky if you have one great pitcher. You're really lucky if you have two good pitchers. I like that we have the pitch count instituted now, so these teams are going to have to dig a little deeper into their depth. I do feel like if we can give them that 5-day window, the healthier they're going to be. I mean, if you look at it, if we're going from the top down from professional and collegiate and we're being conservative there, why are we not being conservative in our youth and our high school levels? It should be more conservative from the bottom up. So I would agree with Jim. The more conservative that we can be with that, the better.
Dr. Don?
I think it's important to look at your pitcher. If they're starting to change their mechanics, if they're getting fatigued, pitch count doesn't matter. You've got to get them out. I mean, I think it's not a one-size-fits-all, and especially, these pitchers that are throwing over 85 miles per hour, those are the ones you've got to watch extremely carefully. But if you see that they're fatigued or if they're in any pain, they need to come out no matter what their pitch count is.
Rob, what's a schedule like typically for the Gophers between outings? Starting pitching and relievers, because it's probably different for both.
Yeah, the starting pitchers only pitch once a week. So if you're the so-called Friday starter, you pitch every Friday, and there's quite a bit of rest in between. In fact, I will tell you that one of the biggest adjustments they have moving into minor league baseball is the 5-day rotation. And they're just not used to that because they're used to more recovery time. The relievers, a little bit different. Usually in our program, it's based on their age. Last year we had a closer. There was a true closer on our team. He was able to throw 2 out of 3 days on the weekend. Never 3 days in a row, but 2 out of 3. But he was also 23 years old. And he was a man. He wasn't a boy anymore. So we have a midweek starter. The guy that starts midweek on a Tuesday or Wednesday, he doesn't pitch on the weekend. He just pitches the next Tuesday or Wednesday. And I just give you a couple statistics. I took a recent pitching staff, and that we had 13 pitchers throw in a season, and 11 of our 13 threw at least one pitch in the season 90 miles an hour or above. 11 out of 13. And the team ERA that year was like 2.89. It was one of the best years we've had recently. But in those 54 games, we had 15 pitch counts of 100 plus. And 8 of the 15 were by one guy. He was our number one pitcher. He got drafted really high. He was our stud, if you will. And he was able to go over 108 times out of his outing. But that's only once a week. It's only once a week. Now, just as an epilogue to that, 9 of those 13 pitchers played professional baseball. 9 of those 13. And 3 of those 9 that played professionally have had some level of arm surgery in their career.
Yeah, it's amazing. Let's get Jim a microphone here because I'd love you to tell the audience before it starts raining here. You threw in 89 games in the early 2000s with the Giants. How did you wind up throwing more than once every other day? And then tell the audience what happened toward the end of the year when you had, I believe you told the story on our podcast, that you had pitched like 9 or 10 games or days in a row at one point. Just tell the audience the anecdote, the story here.
So what happens is with the Giants, they have a 162 game schedule. I threw in 89 games. How do we do that? I threw every other game for the season. Every other game, I'm in there. And then I threw 9 games straight. So, and again, if there was an off day in there at one point, but being able to throw the ball 9 days in a row, I mean, it's
not recommended, by the way.
It's absolutely not. Again, that took a lot of preparation to get to that point. But at the end, they say, Jim, just let us know how you feel every day. I said, I will. So I'm playing catch, and it's starting to loosen up. I'm like, I'll be fine. I just need a little more time to loosen up. So I did that every day. And then day 9, I threw, and I said, I feel okay. Day 10 came. I started playing catch. I'm like, I don't want to throw this baseball right now. So I told the pitching coach, I'm like, I need the day off. And he goes, absolutely. We worked really hard. We have a chance at the playoffs. It came down to that last day. And so that whole game, I'm going back and forth in the training room. And I was throwing the 8th inning for him. And as you guys see here in the Twins game, setup is really important because you got to get to the closer. So that game, I wasn't available after 9 games straight. 8th inning comes, we're up 3-1 in LA, Giants, Dodgers, huge rivalry, and we lost. The people that were out in the 8th inning, they couldn't get anybody out. So we ended up losing 5-3, and that kind of shot down our playoff hopes. But then after the game, the trainer calls me in and said, Jim, the GM wants to see your elbow. You need an MRI. I said, absolutely not. He goes, what do you mean? You couldn't throw today, so you must be hurt. I said, no. Because I had media come and ask me, Jim, they said you're hurt. No, I need a day off. I just threw 9 in a row. And then they saw it as an excuse. They want to get an MRI to see what's in my elbow. I'm like, I know there's something in there now after throwing for 9 days straight in 89 games. And I said, well, you're going to have to pay for it. And they looked at me like, of course we'll pay for it. I said, no, you're going to have to extend my contract. I'm on a rookie salary. you got to extend my contract, then you can look at it all you want. But, yes, that was that season. It was great. It kind of gave me an opportunity to showcase what I did my whole career, take care of my arm, and I was able to kind of push it. Don't recommend it, and obviously my career was never really the same after that. So I could blame that, or I could just blame I was getting a little older. But
so how would a question for all 4 of you here, and then we'll get to some Q&A. Hey, Pete, let's do Q&A after the next stretch here, just so in case we get dumped on and give the audience a chance. But one more question real quick. The difference between pain, fatigue, injury, where are those lines, and how do you know as a pitcher, and how do you know as an observer, whether you're a parent or a coach? Let's start with in the middle here with Dan, and then work our way up.
So as far as pain, the biggest thing we're looking for is joint pain. So if you're feeling it kind of deep and within your shoulder or deep within your elbow, especially the medial elbow, the inside of the elbow, that would be something where you should call Dr. Dom or your physician to get it looked at. Fatigue is going to be that, my arm's hanging a little bit more today. I pick up a baseball and I don't feel like doing it, like he was saying. That's more of that fatigue. Sometimes it loosens up, but if you're throwing the ball and you don't feel like you have anything on it, that's that fatigue. Okay, so a lot of times with these players, if they keep pitching and playing through that, that's when we're going to start having problems.
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Dom.
I would echo that. You really want to look at the whole body. What I see a lot is someone has had an ankle injury or a back sprain or another injury, shoulder injury, and they feel it in their elbow because they haven't fully rehabilitated their other injuries. So I think it's really, really important to look at the whole kid. I saw one kid who had a tibia fracture, and he hadn't really gone through the rehab all the way. He kind of felt better and it was done. Then when he went to pitch again, first thing he did was hurt his elbow because he wasn't fully rehabilitated. And I bet you played another sport besides baseball when you were younger, right?
I did.
We talked about that.
Yeah, I did play multiple sports, and that definitely helped me, northern climate. But again, with that being said, I was a late bloomer. It does take time. And so that's where you have to kind of, expectations are always so high at every age. Understand sometimes it takes longer than you'd think to be as good as you'd like to be. And for sore and hurt, it's all individual, but I tell guys, I'm like, if you look at a baseball on the ground and you have to go play catch, if you look at it going, I don't think I want to throw you today, then that's when you're hurt. Go get it checked out. Don't even give it a shot. There's other days that, I don't know, and you pick up the ball, you make a throw, and then you make a decision. Hopefully there's some preventative stuff going ahead of time, like active warm-up, foam rolling, whatever. There's a lot of preparation before you touch a baseball. That's the key, obviously. But yes, after you've gone through all this work and got loose and you're still like, I don't know, then don't do it. Don't do it. Give your arm a chance. Listen to it.
What's that like from a coach's perspective when you're observing? You have to sort of draw those lines in those gray areas.
Well, Phil, the analogy that I use is that I don't know how many weightlifters we have out there, but imagine if you're not a weightlifter and all of a sudden you go to the gym and start lifting. How do you feel the next morning or 2 days after? You feel really sore. To me, there's a difference between being sore and being injured. And the injury is what Dan describes as sharp, acute pain in the joint, can't throw the ball. Because of that, then you're hurt. Then you have to see a physician and get it analyzed. But the soreness is a different story from a muscular standpoint.
And it's never normal to have pain at night that keeps you from sleeping. So if your kid's going to tell you that, I couldn't sleep very well last night, I rolled over on my shoulder, it hurt, that's never okay.
We have some time for Q&A.
We do. But I'll start. So if anybody up here has questions, just flag me down. I'll bring the mic up to you, and I'll be right over here. Question in terms of Dan. You had mentioned about a routine, having one.
Yeah.
So if I'm an organization, a parent, coach, where do I go to get that trusted routine? Who do I trust? And what does that look like?
Well, I would look kind of in your local area, anything within that sports medicine side of things. Seek out if they have a person with baseball interest, more of kind of a baseball specialty. That would be the person that I would start to go through. You can do some of your research on your own. There's a lot of stuff kind of, through the internet, but be careful with some of that stuff. I like to look at more peer-reviewed research. So, if research says one thing, it's got to be backed up by multiple research, not just one study. So I think I would look more to that side of things.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on that? We have a question in the audience here, and we'll get to you in the blue shirt after this one for sure.
Okay, we ready?
I have a question on icing. I'm reading some different philosophies on right immediately after a game. Some are saying that icing right after a game can slow down the healing process. Obviously, for years, you've all been taught to ice as soon as you're done pitching. So I'm curious what your current philosophies are on that.
There's sort of a movement where people are getting away from icing all the time, but I'll tell you, you feel better after you ice, and probably Jim can speak to that. Icing the elbow, icing the shoulder afterwards, it's just going to decrease inflammation, and the way it does that is it decreases blood flow. So all you're doing is you're just decreasing blood flow to the area. So if you're going to ice, you want to do it afterwards. Heat before, ice after is still, I think, a reasonable thing if you think about blood flow to the area. And, I don't have a problem with not icing, but I think actually it's going to help, at least it'll help you feel better that evening.
Professionally, we have about half. Half guys ice, half don't. What we do is if they do ice, the next day they need to come in, and then we do like a contrast. We got to warm up the arm prior to that day's work. We just feel as an organization it's important to make sure we get the blood moving, that if you ice and it contracts, I iced earlier in my career and I didn't at the end. So I think it's one of those, one size doesn't fit all when it comes to that. I think if you monitor it, some kids leave it on for 30 minutes. Really, I don't think that's, let them talk about that. I think too long isn't good, and I also think that sometimes it'll mask, at least at the time, and it's, they'll feel a throbbing, and they'll blame the ice. Oh, it's just the ice, and it's not. So I would like not to have ice, for players, but I also absolutely see the need because you are breaking up a lot of stuff when you throw, and so ice has a purpose, but just be careful with it.
I think if you've got swelling, that's a good reason to ice. If you're working on it, if you're rehabbing an injury and you've got swelling and inflammation, ice can be helpful. If you're just doing it to do it as a reflex, not so important.
I got another one right here.
15 to 20 minutes, too.
This is probably going to take about 30. But,
Or stick your elbow in the Dairy Queen blizzard.
Anyway, this might be more for Coach on the end there, but so I played baseball growing up. I've coached my kids for years and years, and I am a victim of overuse for sure. I remember when I was a sophomore in high school putting Icy Hot on just so that I could go out and practice because we threw and we threw and we threw. And, there was nothing to stop us. We just kept doing it. And so I would never let these kids pitch when they were younger because I knew that coaches didn't understand mechanics. They didn't understand what it was like to actually have to throw. So I tried to keep them off the mound as much as I could. And eventually you get to a stage where winning is important. And so you put the kid out there and you pitch and you pitch and you pitch. So my question to you guys is this. So we limit the amount of kids that are on teams, right? So I remember going up and having to look and find my name and if I made that team or not, and I made the team, man, it was awesome. But that only limits you to 12 or 15 kids that are on that team, meaning there's only 12 or 15 arms on that. And when you talk about the shortstop coming into pitch or the catcher coming into pitch, there's only 12 or 15 arms on there. So that means those 12, you're going to pitch, and you're going to pitch, you're going to pitch again, you're going to pitch again. So my thought isn't just about pitch counts, but it's about team counts. When you talk about only having 20 kids on a team because it's prestigious that you made that team, but shouldn't it be more about, shouldn't we put more kids out there to see if they can be productive and evaluate them and push them a little further? Do we only have to have 20 kids on a team, or could it be 30, or could it be 40? And maybe we could save some arms. Yeah, eventually maybe some kids figure out this isn't for me. But in the end, isn't it more about, if we're talking about, and especially in the youth sports, let's not cut kids because we don't think they're good enough today. Maybe they're good enough 2 weeks from now, or there's other, that's more my question is, could we expand this thing where it's not just 20 kids that play on a team? Is it more like 25 or 30?
Well, there's a lot there to respond to, but I would say one of the things about youth athletics is how strong a personality do you have to stand by your convictions? Because oftentimes in youth athletics or even high school athletics, you have to answer to your superiors and also to a parent group that focuses on the scoreboard instead of the process. And the process is, when I was coaching in youth athletics, my only two goals were to teach them how to play the game and to get them to come back next year. Those are my two goals. And I told the parent group that I was working with that I get enough pressure winning and losing with the Gophers. I don't need it with a youth team that's 13 years old. And so I didn't care whether we won or lost. I really didn't care. But if you're creative in your managing, and you know your team, you can manipulate the game to try at least at some point to put your team in position to win. But I pitched everybody. And some of the kids, they all want to pitch because it's the center of attention, but oftentimes not necessarily great results. But if you educate your parent group and educate your players on what you're doing, what the process is, getting everybody involved, teaching them how to pitch, give them a chance, then we'll see what happens. I think you're going to be better off than having people just focus on the end results. I mean, it's the scoreboard affects us all. There's no doubt about it. And as far as the numbers go, hey, I'm all for participation. If you can figure out how to have 25 guys in your roster and keep them all happy, then why not? Why not do that?
You got to find those 14-year-old Ron Mayhay lefty specialists, put them in for a batter, take them out, and give your horses a breather.
I did a lot of that. I mean, keeping your kids active on the bench, charting pitches. How many pitches does Johnny have this inning? Well, he's got 14. Okay. Can you give the kid a defensive chart? Try to get the kids to pick off signals from the other team. Position your defense. Get everybody involved in the game doing a role so when you interchange them, they go home in the car and their parents say, "How was your experience today?" And they go, "Hey, I had a great time. I picked off the signals from the pitching coach from the other team." He forgets the fact that he made 2 errors in right field and struck out 3 times, but he had a great time because he contributed. And that's the trick to me of coaching youth athletics and trying to keep everybody involved and keep them coming back and play the game.
We got another question over right here to the right.
One of the things I was curious about, and I just hadn't heard the phrase yet used today, was long toss. We've been told since we were kids the importance of long toss, not just for pitchers, but for everybody. And so we practiced it throughout high school, and now that I'm a coach, I do the same thing with my players. And so I'm just sort of wondering, to make that ball go farther, you're putting more stress on your arm. Is that just for strength, or is it good for recovery point of view? Is it where do you find the need for long toss is, and how often per week? Is it, if you practice 5 days a week, is it, hey, this is how we start practice, or is it a one time a week type of thing?
It's great question. With long toss, depending on what your terminology is, what distance is long toss? Is long toss as far as you can throw a baseball, or is long toss 120 feet? I mean, you have to find that. What we've done with the Cubs, we have 3 different days, and players have to sign in. What is your day today? After they're done, what they have to do on a daily basis, they get their pre-work in, and they work themselves back slowly to 120 feet. So if you're looking at a baseball diamond, you're from the foul line, you're about at the cut of where the second baseman would play. At that point, you have a decision to make. If your arm's not loosening up, it's a recovery day. You take it in. At 120 feet, you're like, I feel pretty good today. It's your maintenance day. So at 120, you might go back a little bit further, and you jump on a couple. Come in, do a little flat ground for pitchers, and you call it a day. And then you have another day. I haven't thrown in 2 days. For me, unless you weren't feeling good, it was mandatory for relievers once a week and starters once a week, like in between outings, to long toss. What is long toss is you go out to 120 for us, and then you start working it back. How far back do you go? You went back as far as you could, as long as you could throw within the chest frame, if that makes sense. I mean, because it doesn't do, from what I've seen, any good for a guy just to terrible mechanics to see how far I can throw this ball. So it was mandatory that when you went back, you could have a flyer, you let go of one, and you miss by 5 feet. But everything else had to be within a catchable range, like a step and a catch. And if you went, because you see some kids that will just let it fly and they throw it over their heads and short. It's not catch, it's fetch. The ball's flying everywhere. That doesn't do the player any service in control, feeling the baseball. And mechanically, they're obviously not in a good place. So that's where long toss for me is at a 120. If they can walk back from there and throw it within reason, I have no issue with them going back as far as they can. And I think they're staying within the mechanics.
You want to know what makes you a great, accurate long toss thrower? Doing it on AstroTurf at the Metrodome. If you overthrow someone or skip it, now you got to chase it.
Oh, you get a good workout.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Rob?
I think one good measure for long toss, especially for the younger players, is twice the length of the bases. So if you play in a 60-foot diamond, long toss would be a max of 120 feet. Played a 90-foot diamond, get out to 180 feet. I just really believe, especially for position players, you got to train your arm for a longer throw than you ever make in a game. And I think if you can play long toss 3 times a week, that distance, you're going to strengthen your arm over a period of time. I mean, I can tell you that I've gone to games and watched pregame, and I've recruited players and made decisions to recruit players that played long toss before the game, and everybody else quit and went in the dugout. And the kids that go out and warm up and only throw the length of the bases and they quit, they're never going to have a good throwing arm. They're never going to train their arm, never going to get stronger, in my opinion.
So the biomechanics with long toss are different than your actual throwing. So you change your biomechanics. I'm okay with it going back, but the challenge as you as a coach is you're going to have different kids that can do different things. So you as a coach have got to dictate kind of who should be probably doing what. So you should be throwing more kind of on that line. And like what Jim was saying, if they can throw it where they can catch it, that's where they need to get to, right? If they're playing fetch or whatever, then it's not really doing them any good.
Any other questions?
Yeah, the founder of the Legion Baseball Hub, Nick Kennedy.
Thanks.
Let's give Nick Kennedy a round of applause for organizing all of this, by the way, and for looking great in that white buttoned-up polo tonight.
Thank you. Let's
You're pushing it.
Let's for sure thank our panelists. I have 2 questions. The first is for Rob and for Jim. So, Rob, I'll start with you. When you look at high school age and when you're recruiting, and when you see a pitcher who is effective at the high school level, but with really bad mechanics, what is your take on recruiting them and their long term? So I'll do that to Rob, and then also to Jim. You know, Jim, when you kind of the same question, but at the higher level. So Rob, if you want to start with that.
It's a very good question. I guess I want to echo something Jim said earlier, as I really focus on the head. If a kid's a head jerker, dips his head a lot, gets out of whack mechanically, then to me he's going to have a hard time repeating his release point, being a strike thrower. It's really tough to change that. Unless you put a neck brace on the kid and train him with a neck brace on, it's going to be really hard to change that mechanically. So there's no doubt the mechanical flaws in a high school age player for recruitment certainly are a factor, because if they really have poor mechanics, you got to believe at some point they're going to break down.
Professionally, we've had guys obviously with not ideal mechanics, because I don't know if there's a perfect mechanic out there, because even those guys get hurt. But we've had some really poor mechanics, but they'll show plus stuff, whether it's a velocity, a slider, a curveball. And so then they'll take a flyer on it. And again, professionally is a little different than on the collegiate level. And so then we try to refine the best we can mechanically, but you're kind of working with, what you see is what you get. And it doesn't turn out really well most of the time, because it is hard to make those changes because they've had success doing something one way. So professionally, we do take that because we don't want to cookie cutter a whole staff, but it is hard to change.
Right here.
So one question about kind of the high school level, maybe college as well, is what should off-season training, off-season workout could look like, or kind of framework for it?
So the biggest thing off-season wise, you're going to really want to be looking at strengthening the legs, strengthening the core. Probably the best thing we do is working with a sports medicine provider that can do a good evaluation of every one of those kids to give them insight on this is what we look at, okay? So from the top down, we look at total arc of motion with the shoulder, right? We want to see that roughly within 5 degrees. So if we can measure kind of where we're at with the shoulder to get them on a stretching program, because if we're lacking with internal rotation or something like that later on, that could be a predisposition to injury. Probably one of the biggest things looking at is core. A lot of the high school and youth kids looking, especially if they're falling off to first base all the time. A lot of times with that, the glutes are real weak, and if we can strengthen those, that would be beneficial. Getting them on a good strength and conditioning plan, getting them going on some good arm care, and working with a pitching coach on some certain biomechanical things, that would be the A-level program that I would say in the off-season to do.
And it's important to remember that lifting for baseball is not the same as lifting for football. You don't need to go in there and bench press and max out. You really want to be working on the muscles in the back, the scapular stabilizers, and that'll do a lot more for you than any bench press.
And we have another one right here.
Hi, thanks for being here. For post-game recovery, what, if not ice, then what?
So post-game recovery, if not ice, you got to have a good cool down. So I guess best probably just to demonstrate it, but kind of the Codman's exercises. So when you're doing with that is just kind of letting it hang and doing the arm circles, doing kind of the going back and forth. A good strengthening exercise for the rotator cuff is what we call full can. So coming up at 45 shoulder height. If you're going higher in shoulder height, you're getting impingement, but just shoulder height, and then kind of slowly coming down. Doing that with no weight, kind of more of as a flush. Even just doing some light arm circles. The full body flush of doing, having them do some jogging, some jumping rope. In the professional level, when they get done with a game, they're coming in and they're getting on a exercise bike or elliptical or something to that measure. And then after that would be as if they would go to an ice or not.
I just want to say one thing about recovery that people always forget, and that is sleep is one of the most important things that you can do to recover. And you release growth hormone during sleep. So I tell people, you want to get your growth hormone levels up, sleep more. These kids that are sleeping 6-7 hours a night, it's not enough.
Yeah, Jim?
Everybody for us, they need to either jump on the elliptical machine, bike machine. If you don't have it, they either jump rope for 5 to 10 minutes for jumping rope, which is actually harder than you think, or they run 10 poles. It's just something to get their arm moving, and they all get stretched by the trainer. So afterwards, they get like an active recovery where the trainer will help them get through ranges of motion. Afterwards, they'll even do their fingers, which I still don't know what that really does, but it is, it's not ice. That's why I think people walk away feeling better, because they don't just finish and feel that heartbeat in their arm. They actually work it out by some stretching and some active warm-up.
And one right here.
So 2 quick questions. On the youth side of things, what's the current take on at what point are breaking pitches okay? Obviously, there's, previously, it was, 10 years ago, it was very much don't do until you're much older. New research has said, it's much more about the velocity to what you guys have talked to before. So first question is age for breaking pitch. Second question has to do with recovery. What is the current take from a medical standpoint on arm recovery using, baseball for kind of rolling out and, smashing out kind of the fascia and that kind of thing from a recovery standpoint?
I'm going to comment on the curveball. You're talking to a guy that threw a curveball when he was 10 years old and kept throwing it all the way through high school and college and really never had a problem because of it. So to me, the point's always been it's not necessarily the curveball, it's correctly throwing the curveball. I just happened to bring a prop today to show you that.
I was going to ask if anyone wanted to use their props here, the baseballs, and I'm glad Rob has taken the initiative.
Everybody's seen one of these. Okay, whether you like Diet Dew or not, you've seen one of these. The bottom of one of these is about the same diameter as a baseball. So get your players, and I used to do the youth athletics, I made them bring one of these to practice. And when you throw the ball, you throw a fastball all the way to the front, and then you flip the bottle, so I'll do it here. It has that kind of rotation. That's a curveball rotation. If you flip the bottle improperly, in other words, doorknob the bottle, like that, that's going to put strain on the elbow. So without throwing a baseball, thanks, Nick, without throwing a baseball, you have an inexpensive toy there that they can learn this proper spin of the breaking ball as opposed to the doorknobbing the ball. I would totally avoid the slider until they get late high school and college age before they ever throw the slider because it's too easy to hurt the elbow on the slider.
Yep, and to echo that point, there's the other one you can do is you take two baseballs and you tape them together. Tape the two baseballs together. Same thing Rob was just showing you, that when they're taped together, one will be on top, and when you throw it, you'll see what the ball does. So that's a drill to work on it, to do it properly, but what age would I talk about it? 12 if they've been pitching with good mechanics. 13, I think, and it's all good mechanics. The kids that I work with, will I say no to a breaking ball? Absolutely. Is that going to cause more stress than a fastball? Bad mechanics, probably not, but it's not going to be very effective anyways. So let's work on the fastball instead. So you get better mechanics, more repeatable. Again, it's not about perfect mechanics, it's about repeating what you're doing. And I believe that if you can repeat your mechanics, you can start working on a curveball, and it shouldn't put that much more stress on your arm.
I was going to add one more thing about the off-speed pitch. Teach all of your young pitchers the changeup. Got to have a changeup. So if their hands are not big enough, you think about in football and in basketball, we have smaller balls, but in baseball they're always the same size, whether you're 6 years old or whether you're a big leaguer. So put three fingers on the ball and touch the thumb and the pinky finger on the bottom, like this, and just have them throw a fastball. Change the grip like this, and just have them throw a fastball, because most of them at that age can't get the feel of a circle change, but they can just spread their fingers apart. A lot of them, when they're really young, throw with three fingers anyway. Which throw three fingers, take the thumb off the bottom, touch the two fingers on the bottom, and just have them throw a fastball, and the drag of the fingers will help slow the ball down. They'll have good arm action on it, and it won't strain their arm.
For Rob and Jim, if the goal is, if strikeouts are flashy, right, and the goal is strikeouts and missing bats, and we think velocity and we think sliders and breaking balls, isn't it fair to say that if you can just throw a really good changeup and have a wide gap in the velocity between, regardless of how hard you throw your fastball, if you can throw a really good changeup, you're putting less stress on your arm potentially, and you can still pick up those swings and misses, right?
Well, there's no doubt if you can throw a changeup, it makes your fastball better. Because now as soon as people start sitting on your changeup, then your even mediocre fastball looks a lot faster. And so being a two-pitch pitcher with a fastball change is where I definitely would start young pitchers, no doubt about it. And then as they perfect the pop bottle or the double ball that Jim had, and they get the rotation down, then you can start letting them experiment with that curveball.
Back in the 80s, everybody had, Mike Scott, Clemens, they had a split finger. And then the sinker and the slider came in, low 2000s. Now with launch angle, now it's more four-seam fastball, curveball. So things are always kind of cyclical when it comes to fastball. Is it a cutter? Is it a sinker? Hitters adjust to it, and they're really good about that. But what doesn't go out of style is a changeup. One of the things you'll never hear is, wow, I'm going to sit on this guy's changeup this at bat. Nobody ever sits on a changeup. They'll sit on a curveball, they'll sit on a slider, they'll sit on a fastball in. They'll do all that kind of stuff, but nobody with a good changeup is going to say, I'm going to look changeup this at bat, I'm going to crush it. Those are a couple things that have never been said. So here's on the recovery part.
What was the question on the recovery again?
Well, right here.
Oh, the rolling out and stuff. Yeah, great. Any of the fascial stuff with the foam rollers, the balls, the lacrosse balls. Yeah, especially that day after. A lot of times that second day after when you're the most sore, just getting in there and trying to work some of those out a little bit. Yeah, I'm all for that.
All right, we have time for one more question. We have to give up some mics here, so we're going to be down to 2. We'll make it work. I've got Bruce Barron right over here, and then anybody else up here have a question before we wrap it up? Okay. Well, if we hustle, we'll get you 2. How about that? Can I steal it? Bruce? I'm on 2.
Are you there? There it is. One's an observation, and actually the first comment is going to be unadulterated plug for a couple of guys at the front desk. Many questions have been, where do you go in the off season? I think it's JimBrowerBaseball.com. Jim is active in Minnesota in the off season. His passion for coaching pitchers and kids in baseball extends well beyond. It's a 13-month of the season effort for Jim, and he's here in Minnesota. Dan at Mayo Sports Clinic has programs that you can plug directly into. He didn't tell you about, but that's what they do. The second thing that I'd point out and get some comment on is that I'm a little alarmed as somebody who's been coaching at the high school type of a level. The pitch count rules that we have in high school and in Legion Ball of 110 and 120 pitches well exceed what I'm hearing from the Cubs organization and from the Gophers baseball program, and these are for 17 and 18-year-olds. There may be some reason to revisit those numbers, and maybe they should be revised downward and encourage more kids to pitch. That also means recovery days and programming those. But I would also note that club teams have no pitch count rules. I don't know what traveling teams have or youth programs have, but so much of what I'm hearing is related to the excessive use. Maybe we need to look at our programs as they are, and then down below to encourage more protective kinds of numbers.
Yeah, so being a part of the pitch count policy with the high school level, so it's kind of keeping up with the Joneses, right? What's California doing? What's Nevada doing? So kind of looking into what's that, and are we going to make a radical change or not? And who's going to blink first there? And the big thing is it's such a new thing for a lot of the coaches that I'm married, and it's kind of, what are we going to do to compromise, right? So I think it's a start. It's nowhere near where probably we eventually want to get to. But I think it will probably end up changing more in the future.
And just real quickly about being the $1 million arm like symposium. That I've said that before. That Jim, what should I do with taking care of my arm? I'm like, treat it like it's $1 million. Whether you're a major league pitcher or you're an amateur, it doesn't matter. If you can treat your arm, and this is for parents, be proactive. My dad was a little over the top. Bruce knows. But again, he did care. So does Rob. Sorry, Rob. You knew that too. But he was very invested and sometimes over the top. But at the end of the day, he did try to treat my arm like it was worth $1 million. And so even at the younger ages, try to keep that in mind. Keep that in mind that would you do this if it was $1 million? And it doesn't mean you're going to make that much, but it does mean that you're taking appropriate care of your arm. Take care of it prior, take care of it during, take care of it after. And hopefully you take that away from what we're talking about here is it's not just a one-stop shop like here's one drill to do and you guys are going to be healthy. It's all-encompassing, and it does take a lot of effort, and that's why you guys are here right now. Everyone's here kind of putting in that time to see what can I do to get, stay healthy, because at the end of the day, then you have a chance to just, if you stay healthy, you have a chance to get better. If not, you're recovering, and there's great people who can help you get better, but at the end of the day, health is always, the priority.
How about this one? Whoa, that's super loud.
Check
Okay.
test.
Here,
This
go
one
ahead.
Working now? Okay. I noticed J-bands didn't get mentioned, and I was wondering, I know they're kind of newer to baseball, but how often should a J-band routine be implemented?
All right, you can start with what you guys
All
do.
right. For us, it's mandatory for every pitcher in our organization to have an active routine. We use bands because they're portable. They hook them on the fence. It's all about a routine. They do the routine prior to every time they touch a baseball. They have their J-band routine. Now, there's two different things they do with it. One is a warm-up. One is a strengthening. Strengthening, they do their J-bands depending on their throwing. If the day after they throw, they usually get kind of a recovery. The next day they do their shoulder work for growth. And again, same thing with the throwing day. The growth day for shoulder work is the second day, so they can take their time. They don't have to worry about throwing through anything, but they can warm it up properly. But we use J-bands every day before they throw. And again, it's more of a warm-up, not just strengthening.
The biggest thing is following a routine, right? So if individually you find that you like that, then certainly try to work with it. Personally, I feel kind of more not doing the bands as much for the warm up. I do some of it for the strengthening, but you got to be careful with some of those things. But there's definitely a place for all that.
So one thing when you are rehabbing, say, your rotator cuff or rotator cuff strain, I don't like to have band work and external rotation because you're going to put the maximum stress at the worst angle possible. So I would rather you do like a very light weight or weight of the arm to start, high reps, and multiple sets.
I mean, in summary, I guess, I just like to say to everybody that if you watch track and field, arguably there's nothing more beautiful than a 400-meter runner that can really, really run. And I would say that in baseball, there's nothing more beautiful to me as a coach than somebody that can really throw. And I don't care if you're 5 foot tall or 7 foot tall, you can develop a very strong throwing arm. Through proper mechanics and repetition, I just think throwing is the number one thing. You think about it at youth athletics, if a kid can really throw, the coaches are all salivating because they can play him everywhere. And the kid that can't throw, they spend most of their time to figure out how to hide him. And so the throwing ability is really the most critical, fundamental skill that you can have in baseball, and developing that throwing arm is just so important.
And we have our last question.
My question is on like weighted ball stuff. I know some people who have done a weighted ball program in the summer and have gained like 7 or 8 miles an hour on their fastballs. Is that something to look into, or is that, bad for the arm?
So I was a little bit concerned about the weighted ball phenomenon and tried to do some research on it. And actually the most recent research would suggest that it does not, between 4 and 7 ounces, whether you 4-ounce, 7-ounce ball, it does not increase the stress significantly on the elbow. So you guys can tell, maybe coaching, what you think about it, or Jim. But from a mechanical standpoint and a injury standpoint, it's not going to necessarily increase the risk.
Do you guys use the weighted balls
We don't use them a lot. We did send some guys up to drive line, for weighted ball up there with Kyle Bodie. And the only thing that we found is that it's all inclusive. And if you talk to, drive line as well, I mean, they do Olympic lifting. They don't just throw a ball really hard and heavy. It's a total body workout. I mean, you have to buy into the process for me. Otherwise, you put yourself at risk of injury. If you're just throwing a heavy ball, because we're talking 4 or 7 ounces less stress. But usually people are talking about, well, what about the 1 pound ball, the 2 pound ball? What happens is now, yes, you're putting undue stress, and it's not necessarily on your shoulder because your arm speed slows down. You get into a stronger position. But what it does, you feel like, wow, I feel really strong. Can you have gains in velocity? Yes, you can. Are they sustained? We did it with the Kansas City Royals. We started out with 7 guys. They did a weighted ball program. And again, injuries are part of baseball. Of the 7, we had 3 have Tommy John. 2 guys showed increase, and then everything kind of came back down to what they were. And we had 2 guys that showed a huge increase and maintained it. So I guess the story for us is that it does put some people at risk because there was injuries. Some people didn't really get much out of it, and a couple guys did. And so it is very individual, and organizationally for the Cubs, we do have people and we support what they do, but we make sure that they have to continue on with the program because it's not just throwing a weighted ball. They have, the measurements every week. They're measuring the shoulder rotation. We're keeping as much safeguards on them as possible. But we have seen some success with it, but there's a lot that goes into that.
Well, folks, that's going to do it. Would like to thank each and every one of our panelists. They've got plenty of things to do with their busy schedule, sharing their knowledge and expertise on the great game of baseball, pitching and throwing. I think we should all give them an incredible round of applause. Thank you.